Hi, I'm Christina, and this is a book review of Severance by Ling Ma. So this is a science fiction, post-apocalyptic fiction novel, and it was published in 2018. Our main character is called Candice, and she lives in New York City. She works in publishing, and her role involves the production of Bibles. Now, this isn't a job that she's absolutely passionate about, that she absolutely loves, but it is a job that she's good at, that she's very comfortable there, and it provides her with the living that she needs to pay her rent and pay her bills. Her true passion is photography, and she runs a blog called New York Ghost, and she really enjoys just walking around New York, exploring different areas and taking photographs and posting them on her blog. Now, she's had a really difficult time recently. Her mother has passed away and her father had passed away longer ago. So she is now an orphan, and she's obviously grieving the loss of both of her parents. She also doesn't have a lot of contact with the rest of her family. So her mum and dad moved to America from China, and then they brought her along later on once they'd made enough money to do so. So she stayed in China originally, and she was raised by her grandparents. But then since she's come to America, she hasn't had a lot of contact with the rest of her family in China. And she essentially now has no contact with them at all. She's also recently broken up with her boyfriend. He has decided that he wants to leave New York City, and she doesn't want to leave New York City. So essentially their relationship is over now, and she did not want the relationship to end. And amongst all of this really difficult stuff that's going on in her personal life, there is now a pandemic. So it is called Shen Fever, and it's arrived from China, and basically the first symptoms are similar to that of a common cold. So obviously it's really difficult to identify who just has a cold or who has Shen Fever. And then after about 1 to 4 weeks of being infected, it leads to a fatal loss of consciousness. So these people aren't zombies in the traditional sense. They're more zombies in the sense of their behaviour is just routine patterns. So for example, we have a woman who's working in a shop and she has Shen Fever, and she's working in a juicy couture shop, and she just constantly folds and refolds clothes and then puts them in this beautiful rainbow pattern, and she just constantly keeps folding the clothes. There's also a girl who's in her house and she's reading a book as she would, and she's flicking the pages, but the book's upside down, so she's clearly not reading it. And then her mother is downstairs and she's in the dining room, and she's just constantly laying the table and then emptying the table and then relaying the table. So essentially people who become infected with Shen Fever are just going through the motions of their life again and again and again, and they seem to get stuck on a particular task that was maybe quite important in their life. So for example, the woman working in the juicy couture shop was just folding clothes repeatedly, and having worked in Primark previously, that is a lot of your job, just constantly folding clothes and tidying up areas. And obviously the woman who's like the housewife, she's just constantly laying the table again and again. So the people who become infected don't pose any type of threat to people at all. They aren't violent, they don't attack, they don't try to bite you or anything, and they don't even cause any kind of issue in terms of you could catch Shen Fever from them, because that isn't the way this spreads. So Shen Fever is a fungal infection, and the way you are infected is to breathe in the fungal spores. So you could go up to an infected person and they wouldn't cause you any type of threat, you wouldn't get Shen Fever from them. So essentially this seems to really affects a massive proportion of the world. I don't think it tells you exactly how many people succumb to Shen Fever, but it is a lot of people. So we follow Candice in 2 timelines. We follow her in the past, and we also follow her in the present. And in the present, it is the very beginning, early stages of the pandemic. And it first affects her, I would say, in her working environment. So at the moment, her big project is producing a gemstone Bible, which is essentially just a Bible which has a gemstone with it. So she is contacting the manufacturers, and the manufacturers of the gemstone are in China, and the Shen Fever has originated in China. So obviously it's impacting the manufacturing process, and she is going back and forth with suppliers and talking to the clients and saying, you know, suppliers have dropped out and there is a pandemic, etc., etc. And it's very interesting to see the corporate side of it. So even though this is a massive pandemic and people are being affected globally at this stage, and the client's very much like, but we still need this Bible by this date. So it's interesting how she shows the corporate world. I do think that was very, very clever. And I just really enjoyed this book overall, actually. I think that was one aspect I thought was done very, very well. And another aspect for the corporate world is that essentially she decides to keep working in the New York office, even though there is a global pandemic spreading completely across the world. And that is because the company has decided that they want some people to remain working in the New York office. It is their head office, and they want to show to their clients and to their competitors and to the world that it's very much business as usual. So even though this is happening, they are still working, they're still publishing books. In her case, they're still producing Bibles. So what the company decides to do is they approach a number of people and they want a small skeleton staff to keep working in the New York office. And she decides that she will do so. And the way they entice them to do so is to give them a large sum of money. So essentially the contract says, we want you to keep working in the New York office for X number of weeks. And if you do so, we will pay you X amount of money. And Candice very much thinks it's a good idea for her in the sense that she doesn't have any family that she wants to go and be with. A lot of her people have decided to go and see their family and their friends. Obviously, she's lost both of her parents. There's no way she'll be able to go back to China now to see the rest of her family because borders are shutting down and planes have grounded. And obviously she's just recently split up with her boyfriend, so she thinks that really she may as well just carry on, sit it out for a number of weeks and get that nice big lump sum of money, which would really do a lot for her. So that's what she decides to do. And we just kind of watch her as she continues working and going into the office, as the world kind of crumbles around her and society kind of crumbles around her. Obviously, more people are starting to be infected by Shen Fever. And as more people are being infected, people are deciding to stop working, understandably, and going to care for their loved ones rather than just working. Whereas Candice just kind of keeps going, essentially. And it's kind of an interesting look at how people just, in the face of this destruction, she's just very much set on she needs to get to the office at the set time, and sometimes her commute becomes almost ridiculous because the trains stop working and the buses stop working, and she starts having to get taxis each day, and then eventually there aren't any taxis either, and she seems to be one of the very last people in New York because obviously a lot of people have left the city, and the more people have become unwell, more people are going to see their friends and their family. And it gets to the stage where she's essentially going to the office every day, but she's not really doing her work anymore because there's no work to be done. She hasn't heard from her superiors in weeks and weeks, and no one's really sending her any work. There's no way she can contact any of her suppliers in China. She can't contact her clients. So essentially what she decides to do is to continue going to work at the same time and going into the office. But what she decides to do is just keep working on her blog, The New York Ghost, which she absolutely loves. So she just kind of wanders around New York and takes pictures and puts them on her blog, which was always her passion originally. And I won't tell you any more else about the story. She leaves New York with a group of people, and then we kind of follow them as they try to survive, essentially. And it's a bit of a cult-like group of people that she finds herself joining. Not that she has a lot of choice, because obviously there aren't many people left, but we have a man who is very religious, and he is a man that used to work in IT, I believe, and he is kind of the leader of this group, and he knows somewhere that will be safe for them in Chicago. So they're all trying to get to this place in Chicago, this kind of safe refuge area. And yeah, I won't tell you any more about the book. It's a really, really fun read. I really enjoyed it. I've given this one 5 stars, and I would highly, highly recommend it. I had a really good time with it. I think it was a very interesting new take on the genre of post-apocalyptic fiction. I've read many books that are this kind of genre. I really enjoy post-apocalyptic fiction books. I absolutely love them. And there's so many good ones. So for example, the ones I really like are, I really like the book of The Unnamed Midwife. I like I Who Have Never Known Men, I like Station 11, there's so many brilliant ones. And this is up there as really, really good with the rest of them. I really enjoyed it. And it's an interesting take on it. It's kind of a virus pandemic novel, and kind of like a zombie novel, if you will, but they're not traditional zombies. And yet she very much looks at kind of the corporate side of this, which is interesting because I don't think I've read another post-apocalyptic novel which kind of focuses on the your kind of job and the corporate side. I think in a lot of post-apocalyptic novels, people generally just abandon their jobs pretty quickly. Obviously, once you've realised that it is the end of the world and you're essentially not going to be paid, and money will cease to be of any use anyway, a lot of people just kind of abandon their job pretty fast, and that's not something that's ever really explored in post-apocalyptic fiction. But Candice very much continues her job for as long as she is genuinely physically able to, and even then she very much will stay until that date they've told her to keep working in the office, even though she's the only person left and there's no one left in the office at all. She needs to hit that date because she needs that lump sum of money. And it's very interesting look at kind of corporate America and just corporate work in general. I think another thing that's interesting is she's meant to be a millennial woman, and I think she's kind of just maybe going through the motions of life, that she wakes up and she gets dressed and she puts the makeup on and then she goes to work and then she works and then she comes home and then she takes the makeup off and she goes to bed, and she does the same thing again and again and again. I think it was like an interesting look that she kind of continued her life even though the pandemic was happening around her, and yet she just kind of continued going through the motions. And maybe a question of who's the real kind of zombie-like person there. Is it the person that has succumbed to Shen Fever who sits in her shop and just continuously folds clothes, or is it someone like Candice who just does the same things as she sees the world crumbling around her? So I really, really enjoyed it. I think it was very well written. I really enjoyed Candice as a character. I think she's a very interesting main character, and she's a very strong main character. I really enjoyed spending time with her. And yeah, just so many interesting themes that this book explores. It really covers a lot of ground. Obviously, it looks at, like I just said, it looks at corporate America, it looks at immigration, it looks at people's kind of identity and their belonging, and a lot of really, really good topics are explored in this. We look at kind of the loss of a parent, the loss of your kind of cultural identity, we look at grief, we look at the loss of a relationship and heartbreak, and kind of that, I don't know really if it's called a theme, but that kind of idea of working the job that you don't love, that you're not passionate about, but you do it because it provides you a stable living, and then your passion is something separate. I don't know if that has a word, but I found that very interesting, especially to address that in like a post-apocalyptic fiction novel. I don't think I've ever seen a book do that before, which I really enjoyed, and I can definitely relate to that feeling that Candace has, in the terms that I have a job that I hope that I am good at and it provides me with a living, but I wouldn't say I'm truly passionate about it. This would be more my passion with books. Like Candice, obviously her passion isn't the production of Bibles, but she's good at her job and it provides her a living. Her passion is photography, but she probably won't be able to make a living out of that. I think a lot of people can probably relate to that, and I'm sure a lot of millennials especially could relate to that. So yeah, I really, really, really enjoyed that actually. I thought it was really good. And I think as well, she goes through so much, and there's more of this story that I certainly won't tell you, but she's dealing with a lot in this, a hell of a lot. And it's really, really interesting. I really like the direction it takes, and there's so many more themes it explores, like the idea of kind of cults and religion later on, and kind of the idea that the people that are posing the biggest threat to her aren't the so-called kind of zombie-like people who are infected by Shen Fever, but it's the other survivors out here that are like posing a threat to her. And yeah, it was really, really good. I think it was a really, really strong, solid book, and I do think it's unlike any of the other post-apocalyptic fiction books that I have read, and yeah, I just really enjoyed it. So I would highly recommend that you read it if it sounds interesting to you. And also it's interesting that, again, this is another one of those books that was written before the COVID pandemic, and yet it feels so realistic to what actually happened in the world. So for a long time, we're seeing them talk about the N95 masks, And we see, you know, the original response of the companies like, oh, we think it's okay, here's some general information, but nobody has to wear masks, but if you would like to do so, you can do. And then it goes towards that everybody has to wear a mask, and then it goes towards the everybody has to wear a mask, and we've issued with all of these masks. I thought, yeah, it was really, really similar to the start of the COVID pandemic. Obviously, different kind of outcomes, obviously, and this is more of an end of the world one, but another interesting one where the author has written the novel prior to the pandemic, and yet it's all kind of eerily similar to the beginning stages of the one that we lived through. So yeah, that was really, really interesting too. So yeah, highly, highly recommend it. I thought it was written really well. Really enjoyed the character of Candice. I think she's a brilliant main character, and she has so many different layers and nuances to her, and so much I've not even talked about who she is. And yeah, really liked it. So thank you so much for watching. If you have read this one, I'd love to know your thoughts on it down in the comments below. And if you have any more recommendations for really good post-apocalyptic fiction novels that you'd like me to read, that you think I should read, I would love to read them, because it's one of my absolute favourite genres. And I think, yeah, this is just another excellent example of the genre. And I will link some of my other book reviews for some of the other post-apocalyptic fiction novels, because there's some really good ones out there. I've read some excellent ones now, and yeah, this is another one that's really, really good, and I'd highly recommend it. So thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next one.